We begin tonight with the news that the World Trade Organization's 164 members have voted unanimously to appoint Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as the next Director General. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala makes history as the first woman and the first African to head the world's trade body. She was formerly Nigeria's finance minister and managing director of the World Bank. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala now faces the challenge of reviving the influence of the WTO, rebuilding relationships with a more multilateral United States, and reforming the WTO's very complicated dispute settlement system. She begins her new role on the 1st of March and laid out some of her plans to WTO member countries earlier, a speech that Arise News had exclusive access to.
I'd like to express my profound gratitude to the WTO membership for electing me to lead this organization at this critical juncture. Special thanks to President Muhammadu Buhari and all my Nigerian compatriots for their support and prayers. I also want to recognize and thank ECOWAS and AU heads of state, the ACP Secretary General and the ACP membership for their early support of my candidacy. Thank you to other members who supported my candidacy from start to finish of this selection process. Without the recent swift action by the Biden-Harris administration to join the consensus of the membership on my candidacy, we would not be here today. I'm grateful to the United States for the prompt action and strong expression of support. Finally, my thanks to my family and friends, too numerous to name here, for their strength and encouragement throughout this process. It has been a long and tough road, full of uncertainty, but now it's the dawn of a new day, and the real work can begin. Today, WTO members are making history. For the first time in the 73 years of GATT and WTO, you are selecting a woman and an African as Director General. This is groundbreaking and positive. I'm grateful for the trust you have in me, not just as a woman and an African, but also in my knowledge, experience, and as some of you have said, courage and passion to work with you to undertake the wide-ranging reforms the WTO needs to reposition itself for the future. At the WTO, the DG leads from behind, working with the talented Secretariat staff to help members achieve results. You can count on me to be proactive, to work hard, to be balanced, fair, professional, and objective, so as to continuously earn and sustain your trust.
The new DG of the WTO, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, there. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Dr. Olusegun AgaNGA, Nigeria's former Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment. He also chaired the World Bank and IMF in 2010 and the 8th Ministerial Conference of the World Trade Organization. Good to have you on Newsnight tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's begin first, of course, with your experience in trade and engagement with the WTO in the past. Help us understand what this achievement means for the new DG, Nigeria, and of course, Africa.
Thank you very much, Ngozi, for having me. And Kayode, how are you? Good to see you again after so many years. I think for Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, my former colleague in cabinet, to emerge from this process, which is a very, very robust process, to bring in almost you have to have a consensus from 164 countries and custom territories. It's a big endorsement for Nigeria, for Africa, and indeed for Ngozi as a candidate. Now, that's the first thing, and that's good for the profile of Nigeria and Africa internationally. Now, what this brings for the benefit, that's one of the benefits for Africa, but there are many more other benefits. This year, we started the African Continental Free Trade Area. We commenced the implementation of that strategy. Now, for that to be successful, you need to have a very strong trade facilitation agreement in place. And one of the things which WTO has in place, which we agreed in Bali in 2013, was the trade facilitation agreement. And the countries that are likely are supposed to benefit most from this are the developing countries and the poor countries. And there are mechanisms in the trade agreement which provide support for developing nations and least developed countries to actually benefit from this trade agreement. And I think more and more of the African leaders will be tapping into these resources with someone like Ngozi at the helm of affairs there. The second point, benefit to them, is the fact that some people have complained that only a small minority group within the WTO actually makes some of the key decisions. She will make sure that you have more inclusive and democratic discussions, which will bring in more of the developing nations and the LDCs, including other nations in the world. So I think there's a lot of benefit for Nigeria and Africa.
Dr. AgaNGA, let me just quickly ask. Some analysts say that WTO has been broken for a while. Will you agree with them? And do you think that Dr. Okonjo-Iweala has the right skills to fix the broken nature of WTO?
She has the right skill, but let me help manage expectation here. WTO is a member-led organization. All the decisions in the WTO are made by the members, the 164 countries and custom territories. It is led at the ministerial conference level, and the day-to-day decision-making is left to the General Council. So the role of the DG is the head of the secretariat supporting the WTO itself. So which means that the DG cannot on her own or his own drive the agenda of the WTO, cannot on his own or her own actually force a nation, a country, to do what they don't want to do. But it has big influence in the sense that the WTO DG can play a big role in influencing, in shaping the decision of the WTO. It requires a lot of negotiations. It's like working for 164 bosses. It's not easy. It requires consensus, negotiations, discussions, and all decisions have to be made by concession. So it requires a lot of tact, political goodwill. It requires a lot of someone who has a sort of experience which Dr. Okonjo-Iweala has in terms of she's a reformist. She has worked in a big multilateral organization in the sense of at the World Bank. So she's familiar with that territory. And I think you can't have a better person to play that role. So I think she didn't emerge as a successful candidate because she's a woman or an African. She emerged because she's actually very competent. And that shows you the depth and breadth of Nigerians we have in the diaspora and in Nigeria.
Now, let's quickly talk about the job she has before her. The EU, the United States, including Okonjo-Iweala herself, they've all said the WTO does need reforms. Of course, the G20 nations, for example, on the issue of protectionism and all of that. And of course, they have raised export duties and tariffs. What would you say are the low-hanging fruits that need to be dealt with very quickly?
I think to start with, everyone talks about reform. There's a need for reform, but there's no general agreement about the type of reform that is required. So we've been talking about reform for over 10 years. By the way, WTO was set up in 1995, but GATT has been there before the WTO. So the new DG has the opportunity to help that shape that discussion in a way that you can, at the end of the day, have the sort of reform which you require to drive WTO forward. There's a lot of division within the WTO today, so you need someone who is able to bring them together. Now, there are other areas in terms of, as I said, the areas of the free trade, the trade agreement, the trade facilitation agreement, which is the first multilateral trade agreement that has been agreed in the history of WTO. It took 10 years to negotiate that agreement, And it took about, anyway, it was implemented in 2017. That is an area she can focus on, but it's not an easy job. It's like taking and driving an elephant and asking an elephant to start running. An organization where 164 people have to all agree, have a consensus, it's not easy. And your job is to make sure that they speak and you try and get an agreement, a consensus. It's not easy. It takes a very long time. So it's not going to be easy at the WTO. It's not going to be, but she has the courage, she has the energy, she has the relationships to make it work.
It has been said in the past that China shows very little regard for WTO conventions. Do you think that the new DG can bring this emerging superpower in line?
She's, as I said, given her experience, not just as a minister in Nigeria, but having worked in the World Bank, most of her job when she was in the, at least in the last few years when she was in the World Bank, involved meeting and negotiating with most of these leaders from different countries, from China, from the United States and all that. You need someone who has the goodwill, someone who has some name recognition, someone who has some persuasive skills and some negotiation skills also, who is politically savvy to make things work. And I think she can draw and leverage on her experience and her relationships to make China, to find common ground to start with. I listened to one of her speech earlier on, to find the common ground between China and America to start with, start from the common ground rather than what divides them, and then bring them to the table. The role of a DJ is not an easy role at all. It requires a lot of work. So you need to find a common ground first of all, then bring them to the table and use all your goodwill and relationships to make sure you get things done. But it can be done. It just takes time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olusegun AgaNGA, former Minister of Finance, also former Minister of Trade and Investment with a lot of expertise on World Trade Organization. Thank you for your contribution to this conversation.